As I referenced in my intro, Pope Francis's law restricting the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass is now working its way through dioceses around the world. Now, some bishops are leaving current policies in place, while others are suspending their permissions for the celebration of the old rite. Why is there such alarm and fear over what was the liturgy of the Holy Roman Church for over 1,000 years? Here with analysis of this and much more is President of the Acton Institute, Father Robert Sirico. Happy New Year to you, Father. I want to begin with a new policy issued by Cardinal Blase Cupich in the Archdiocese of Chicago, restricting the use of the Latin liturgy there. The Cardinal's Rule bans the use of the traditional liturgy on Christmas, Easter Sunday, the first Sunday of each month, and other holy days. Those rules also stipulate that the Latin Mass and the Scripture readings have to be in English, and priests need the Archbishop's approval for that traditional liturgy. Those who do get it will be asked to speak to their congregations about the, quote, possibility of using the reformed liturgical rites in the future. Cardinal Cupich explains that his reasoning for these new rules is, quote, to foster and make manifest the unity of this local church, as well as to provide all Catholics in the Archdiocese an opportunity to offer a concrete manifestation of the acceptance of the teachings of the Second Vatican Council and its liturgical books. Now, Father Sirico, you headed a parish where the traditional Latin Mass was celebrated along with the Novus Ordo. What do you make of these rules?
Well, I found them very distressing, and I can only imagine how distressed the people of St. John Cantius were in Chicago when they heard this. And remember, this was being at Christmas, on Christmas Eve. And I just found it very devastating. And as a pastor, I find it, the timing alone, to be very unpastoral and imprudent. Now, we could pick apart the details of all of this, but that's my basic reaction to the whole thing.
Now, St. John Cantius is a parish in Chicago that celebrates both the traditional Latin Mass as well as the Novus Ordo. Here's my question. In your experience with those who frequent the traditional Latin Mass, is there some lack of acceptance of the Second Vatican Council or the liturgical books of Vatican II?
Well, you know, I'm sure there are such people, and I think in the past there were more of them, because now, especially when you have parishes that are celebrating both, there's a healing, there's a reconciliation. You should pardon the phrase, there's a unity that's taking place. Mm-hmm. I have been celebrating the Old Mass since 2007, when Pope Benedict made it available through his motu proprio, and I have not seen. If you want to see the kind of folks who reject both the doctrine, the moral doctrine of the Second Vatican Council, as well as its liturgical norms, Cardinal Cupich only has to look to his own diocese and see Santa Brina, where on Christmas Eve, you had this spectacular thing that took place that was hardly in accord with the Mass of the Second Vatican Council. Now, I'd like to hear some pronouncement on that, but I've heard none.
Yeah, well, we're rolling video of that now, Father, and it's amazing to me. There's one point where a man comes up, he embraces Father Pfleger, who's celebrating the Mass, and they knock over what looks like a canoe of the hosts that are knocked to the floor. And Pfleger just picks them up, throws them back in, and continues on as if nothing's happened. I mean, the flagrant disregard. I can't imagine that this is the vision. In fact, I know it's not, of the Council Fathers. This is clearly not what they saw as the liturgy of Vatican II.
No, it certainly wasn't. You know what is particularly curious about this reaction to the traditional Mass is that it comes from a certain generation of priests who were familiar with the old tradition but never really celebrated it. And in the case of our Holy Father, he was ordained in 1969. That was the very year that the massive Paul VI was promulgated. And Cardinal Cupich was ordained in 75. So I don't think either of these priests ever celebrated the old Mass. It's the young people who are giving vibrancy to the tradition. In fact, I joke and say in my parish, the traditional Mass is the teen Mass, because if you average the age there, it's really remarkable, both with the young babies that are present and the young people who are present.
Yeah, Father, I had occasion during the Christmas Advent and then Christmas to go to 2 Latin masses, one in Arizona, one in Louisiana. I have to tell you, it was packed with predominantly young families and young
Yes.
people who were far younger than I. So their connection to these liturgy wars and the battles over Vatican II, that they have literally no frame of reference. I think
No.
you're right. Cardinal Cupic's new rules, however, appeared in the Vatican News. Now,
Yes.
it is remarkable that you would have local directives of an individual diocese get coverage by the Vatican press. What's the purpose of that? Is that a signal that this is what the Vatican or those in some of these offices would prefer bishops to conduct themselves vis-a-vis the traditional Latin Mass?
Yes, and let's remember that those in those curial offices are the same profile of priests that I've just described. Yes, I think it's trying to send an international message across the bow. Now, these protocols, this document that was issued, was sent well in advance to the Vatican and to other progressive websites. I suspect even before St. John Cantius received the information. And I think what it's trying to do is snuff this out. In particular, we'll see how this plays out, but in particular in parishes where the Novus Ordo exists with the traditional Mass, like my parish, like St. John Cantius and other parishes. It's going to be a whole other for those societies that are devoted solely to the older forms of the liturgy. And I think the reason is the concern that all of these young people, this is where it's growing. Our church, since the motu proprio of Francis was promulgated, the attendance at the old Mass grew. We have standing room only at that Mass now.
You know, that I experienced the exact same thing in 2 different states during the Christmas break here.
No.
And I was frankly astounded by it. And I asked some of the young people there, you know, what brought you? They had never heard of the Latin Mass before, Father, before they saw it mentioned in the media because of the Pope's crackdown. So it's a very interesting, you're getting, you know, perverse brand aggrandizement here by this very negative order. So we'll see. In Providence, this may end up being a good on the whole, because I think people are looking anew and wondering, well, what is this? What was this? When did it happen? And why is it so verboten now? There are other bishops in the U.S., and we should mention them. Bishop Paprocki of Springfield, Archbishop Sample in Portland, Archbishop Cordileone in San Francisco. They've not made any changes in the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass in their dioceses.
I'm not a canonist, but I think what's happening now is you've got the motu proprio of Francis that came out, and then this response to a dubia. It's nice to know that at times they can respond to dubia. But in this case, it attempted to, quote unquote, clarify. Now, I'm not a canonist, as I say, and you'd have to have Father Murray, for example, analyze this. But from my, both of these documents were hastily written. They have contained contradictions, and they contain outright errors that will need to be corrected before they're, you know, formally instantiated in the you know, teaching of the church, so to speak. So I think that my hope is that wiser heads will eventually prevail as this thing shakes out, and there'll be some revision letting up of this.
Well, I also think the other consideration here is, remember, there was a poll of the world's bishops that purportedly preceded this motu proprio. What we now learn in reporting is that that poll determined that the majority of bishops said this is either a good thing or, you know, it's a little group over here. They don't seem to be causing any trouble. It's fine. I mean, there were very few who were saying this needs to be stamped out. And frankly, Father, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, what we see in a lot of parishes as the Novus Ordo, including the priest facing the people, the lack of Gregorian chant, that is actually not what the Council Fathers envisioned when you read the documents and the liturgical books of Vatican II. So how do we reconcile the refinements and evolution?
The documents of Vatican II themselves presume Latin. It says you can have vernacular, but care should be taken that the faithful know the principal parts of the Mass in Latin. It also presumes out of because the instructions, the rubrics at various times say, and then the priest will turn toward the people.
Right.
So you're quite right. What happened after Vatican II, the implementation of it, is where the liturgists really took over, and a whole crop, a new industry came into being to kind of guide this process. And now we're at the spectacle that we described at Santa Sabrina in Chicago.
No, that Santa Sabina is, I have to say, it's an aberration and a nightmare. I mean, when you see it, it's tragic that that's allowed to go on. But here's my larger question, because Cardinal Cupich raises the possibility that people are not accepting the liturgical books of Vatican II. My argument in watching this play out, having read those books, is none of what I see conforms to the books of Vatican II. So how do you expect the general public to embrace it when we see no examples of it? How do you reconcile the refinements and evolution of the Novus Ordo during the reigns of Paul VI, John Paul II, and Benedict with the new understanding that we're seeing now?
Well, I think, you actually do see the Mass of Vatican II being celebrated. And oddly enough, it's in a place like St. John Cantius. It's in a place like Sacred Heart and other places where the Mass doesn't seem like it's another religion from the old Mass, and yet it's in the vernacular or, the norms of the Second Vatican Council are being carried out. But I think you're right. It's really gone haywire, and this division that's happening is not on the part of the people who reverence the tradition. I grew up with the old Mass, but I was trained to celebrate the new Mass. I didn't celebrate the old Mass, as I said, until 2007. And I could take the criticism a little better if I knew these priests who were making the criticism had celebrated the Mass or were associated with communities where it was normatively celebrated. Then they would really see what these people are made of.
Yeah, and we're talking about a very small group of people who attend the traditional Latin Mass. This is not 30 or 40% of the Catholic Church, but it is growing. No. Yes, it is. But it's small. It's a small group.
It is, but I think that's the concern. That my suspicion is that that's the concern, is that the tail will end up wagging the dog, that people are looking for transcendence. People are looking for, that's why they come to church, by the way. And to see a spectacular show that's not as good as what you see at a theater or a convention venue, like they have there in Chicago, is not what people are looking for. I mean, it's not as good as a rock concert. These people are liturgists who really don't know the music. I mean, I watched parts, and the music just wasn't that good. The choreography was mediocre at best. The lighting wasn't very good. It's pretend. It's playtime.
Yeah, no, it's a spectacle. It's the wrong kind of spectacle. During his Christmas address to the Curia in Rome last month, Pope Francis stressed the need for humility among the cardinals. And he had this to say regarding tradition. The vital memory we have of tradition, our roots, is not a cult of the past. Those who are pridefully and easily prone to rigidity, a modern-day perversion that leads people to be unsettled by what is new, only humility can put us in the right condition to meet and listen and dialogue and discern and pray together. Reforming the spirit of the synod will fail if everyone remains enclosed in their convictions. Clericalism, treating clergy members as superior and untouchable, has led some to believe that God speaks only to some, while others must only listen and follow. End quote. What do you make of the Pope's comments there, especially in light of all we're seeing with the crackdown on this Mass and tradition itself?
Well, there's much of what the Pope is saying there is so true. I mean, humility is, given to us by Christ and by Our Lady and by the saints. And I would like to see that same humility be displayed. I think we do need to pray together, but really pray together and to, by the way, Jesus Christ. And I understand some of the sensitivity. You see, stereotypes can lead us to the truth, but sometimes stereotypes are not accurate at all. And the stereotype of the rigid traditionalist, clergy worshiping faithful, it sure doesn't go on in my parish, I'll tell you that. I mean, people voice their opinions, they're respectful, they're loving, they're supportive, but it's a beautiful dialogue. And the different kinds of people who come, it's not the stereotype of, you know, straight-laced people. We have people with tattoos and young people with long hair and all kinds of folks who come. It's really amazing.
Yeah, no, that stereotype is such an old canard. When I read that, I go, these are obviously the people who are informing the Pope on this. Obviously, have never gone out as I have in the past couple of weeks, watched and looked. I mean, I saw the entertainers, comedians, writers, people of real esteem who are quite creative and hardly rigid folks. I mean, I think you'd be shocked. I'm not going to expose them here, but these are the people who are yearning, as you said, for that transcendent. I think they just want reverence and holiness, and they find it in this old rite. So why not give it to them? Is my argument.
This is not really, in a way, this is not a new debate. This is goes back to the council, and when there was talk of the Mass, the vernacular, you may recall, you've referenced it undoubtedly on the show, the writing from people like Agatha Christie, who isn't a Catholic, Malcolm Muggeridge, who pleaded with Pope Paul VI not to abolish the Latin. And
Evelyn Waugh and Graham Greene and so many others. Hardly conservative folk, I might add.
Right. What it reminded me of, you remember some years ago when the Taliban dynamited the Buddha statues in, I think, Afghanistan. It was terrible. And the whole world, the whole aesthetic world responded, not because they believed in Buddhism, but because they recognized there was something about the venerability, the ancient nature of those statues and what it represented to that culture, and the horrifying disregard for the history of that place. And I think this is the similar thing, that there are people who don't believe in the Latin Mass, don't believe in God even, but who recognize the importance of culture, who are horrified by these kinds of things.
Father, before we run out of time, I want to get to this. Last week, Reuters reported that senior Chinese officials briefed Hong Kong Catholic clergymen and other religious leaders on President Xi's vision of religion with Chinese characteristics. It was an unprecedented meeting. It was organized by the mainland's representative office in Hong Kong this past October. And the clerics who attended described the meeting as Beijing's most assertive move yet in its influence or attempt to influence Hong Kong's diocese. Now, Father, we've all seen President Xi's Zionization of religion in China, the crackdown on religious freedom. What are your thoughts regarding this meeting, and how should the Church respond?
Well, it's a very serious move. It is in continuity with everything else that's been going on in Hong Kong in the last year or so. The crackdown on the freedom of the press, the institution of the extradition treaties, the jailing of journalists such as Jimmy Lai. And so I think this is a very serious move and a very sorry moment for Hong Kong Catholics. You know, most of the education that went on in Hong Kong was offered by Christians, particularly Roman Catholics and Anglicans. And this is a recognition of the influence that the Church has had, and now the attempt to suppress that. And what you didn't mention there was it's not just the cultural thing about vestments or things like that. Under the party, this is the Patriotic Association subordinating the Church to the Communist Party. And of course, we've been to this rodeo before in other places in the world, haven't we?
Yeah. But the heinous thing here, Father, is this has the tacit approval and blessing of the Holy See. They insisted that the underground church merge with this patriotic association, and now we see the sorry fruits of this. I mean, look, you know Jimmy Lai, and I know you know people in Hong Kong.
I know Cardinal,
I want to show people.
Cardinal Zen.
Of course, our friend Cardinal Zen. I want to show you this, and share with people a clip of your documentary. The Acton Institute is creating a documentary on Jimmy Lai. Watch this.
The future, which is unknown and uncertain, is still unknown for me, but is certain.
Freedom was a very short journey for me.
He came as basically a refugee from China when he was a teenager.
I was put in the bottom of the fishing trunk, and by the afternoon, we arrived in Hong Kong, and the same night I was taken to a factory to work as a worker. What we eat and sleep in a factory.
He was so poor, not highly educated.
It was a very happy time. It was a time that I know I had a future.
For a Chinese, that's like going from Kansas in black and white to Oz, where everything seems like it's possible.
As long as you wanted to work, you could make it in Hong Kong.
But British gave us all the institutions of freedom.
Freedom of speech, rule of law, property rights, freedom of assembly.
And let our resourcefulness flourish.
They went from an incredibly poor city to a metropolis.
So I started a very small factory.
He's a classic entrepreneur.
And then I went into retailing.
Giordano was this huge brand.
If I just go on making money, it doesn't mean anything to me. If I go into the media business, I deliver choice, and choice is freedom.
Apple Daily played a very important role in Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement.
We've never had a territory of 7.5 million people who have lived and breathed their basic freedom, having that taken away from them.
Hong Konger means determination, fearlessness, the belief in human rights.
Mr. Lai insisted on marching in front where the authorities could see him.
I've been arrested 3 times.
The Hong Kong police raided the Apple Daily
It's
compound.
very likely that, I will have to go to prison.
He chose to stay in Hong Kong.
Their house is firebombed.
All I had, this place gave me.
I watched this man willingly give up the life of a billionaire to become a dissident.
This is a time for sacrifice. Even if they kill me, I will have to fight to the last day.
He's probably the most famous newspaperman now jailed in the world.
I earned freedom, my life.
The documentary is called The Hong Konger, Jimmy Lai's Extraordinary Struggle for Freedom. Why are you doing this now? What does the world need to know about this?
Well, I'm doing it now as a personal initiative of a friend. My friend is in prison. My friend may be extradited to China. My friend, I may never see him again in person. And he's representative of not just the Hong Kong people, but all of China. And we're doing it now and hope to release it in time for the Winter Olympics because we want to call attention. The eyes of the world are fixed on China. We want to remind people what's going on in China with the church, with freedom of the press, with freedom of assembly, with the sports and people to speak out about abuse. All of these things should madden any decent person anywhere in the world.
All right. Now, given all of this, the Vatican should be more open-throated in its defense of the people of China and the faithful there, and the world should not be embracing these Olympics, Father. This is a scandal. I think we should have boycotted them long ago. Maybe COVID will do it for us. Father, we'll have to leave it there. You can follow the work of the Acton Institute and Father Robert Sirico at acton.org and look for that new documentary, The Hong Konger, Jimmy Lai's Extraordinary Struggle for Freedom at acton.org, February 15th. Thank you, Father. We'll talk to you soon.
God bless.